Last episode, the letter to Ephesus started off by relaying an image of Jesus as close, protective, and walking around his church as a reminder that he is present and active and fully aware of what is happening with his people. The pressure to conform to the practices of the culture is real, but this church was commended for remaining moral and guarding against corruption via false teachers and prophets.
But I have this against you, that you have left your first love.
Understand, first love here doesn't mean first in terms of order, but rather highest in ranking. So the positive was that they were doctrinally sound, but there was a decline in their relationship with Jesus. They had stopped loving him the way they once did. In other words, they are backslidden. Listen to Matthew 22, verses 36 to 38.
Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment.
What's most important is the purpose of Jesus. Initially, when people come to Christ, it's all about what he did on the cross. But sometimes the church starts to fall away by focusing on other things like the children's program, the music, etc. Sometimes it becomes about how impressive the church is, light shows, big screens, state-of-the-art technology. That in and of itself is not wrong unless it takes first place over the love of Christ and sound doctrine. When the mission of the church is something other than carrying the gospel to the world, when we feed and clothe people but never give them the gospel, all we've done is made them well-fed, well-clothed unbelievers. And so we are not to do these things in place of the first love. Somehow this church got off track. The Church of Ephesus was working so hard, to the point of exhaustion, guarding against the paganism of the culture and remaining diligent in guarding against false leaders, that they became so protective of the church that they lost sight of the work of the ministry. They were still working hard, they just weren't doing it for the right reason. The truth is, they were simply going through the motions. They had lost their first love, and that's what the Lord rebuked them for.
Verse 5 says, Therefore remember from where you have fallen, and repent and do the deeds you did at first, or else I am coming to you and will remove your lampstand out of its place, unless you repent.
The remedy he gives is to remember and return, to take inventory of their priorities and return to what they initially were doing for deeds. It's easy to get so busy, even with worthwhile things, that it can distract us from the main point, which is Jesus Christ and growing closer to him. They are warned that if they don't stop backsliding, they will risk their right to exist as a church, that he will remove their light and they will die out. The choice was theirs. Now remember, this letter was written to the head of the church, who is responsible for the body of believers, and it is a warning to that church that without a passion for Christ, the church will die out as a church. Its doors will close. What it is not saying is that a believer will lose their salvation. However, we individually also need to be aware of drifting away from Jesus. A simple test is to ask, has your faith walk become a burden? Do you attend church because it's something you should do, or because you find joy being in your Father's house? Do you base what you're doing so as to look like a Christian, or is your motivation based on your love for Jesus? We need to be careful that our faith walk is a relationship and not a religion. Let's conclude with a reminder that although much of this is a historical account, it was documented for our benefit, and just as we are told in chapter 1, everyone who heeds the wisdom written on these pages will be blessed. So I encourage you to take the time to evaluate if you have drifted from Christ, and if so, be diligent in taking steps to return. Stay tuned for the next episode when we will finish with what happens to the Church of Ephesus.